A routine traffic stop spirals into a career-ending nightmare when arrogance collides with truth. An officer convinced of his own power targets a man he assumes is ordinary. But in just minutes, the calm driver will reveal an identity that shatters the officer's confidence and decides his future in uniform. The city of Sacramento stretched beneath a fading sky, streaked with amber and gold as the sun made its slow descent. Office lights flickered on one by one, the distant hum of traffic mixing with the chatter of evening pedestrians. Among the flow of cars, a charcoal gray sedan glided steadily down the boulevard. Inside sat Eric Porter, his tailored suit jacket draped neatly over the passenger seat, his posture relaxed yet deliberate. He had spent the day buried in files, navigating a maze of decisions that shaped lives, and now he was finally heading home to unwind. Eric adjusted the air conditioning, the gentle hum blending with a faint jazz melody drifting from the radio. The rhythm was soothing, a small reward after the day's strain. His fingers tapped the steering wheel in time with the notes, betraying a quiet contentment. Every detail about him spoke of composure, the neatness of his desk at work, the polish on his shoes, the calm cadence of his voice in meetings. To strangers, he might appear to be an ordinary professional wrapping up another day, yet beneath his calm surface was a man accustomed to responsibility and authority. As he approached an intersection, the light shifted to yellow. Eric slowed smoothly, bringing the sedan to a stop just as the red signal lit the road. He exhaled, a simple pause between one moment and the next. Then, slicing through the quiet, blue and red lights erupted in his rearview mirror. A siren blared, sharp and commanding, cutting the serenity in half. Eric's brows furrowed slightly as he glanced back. He pulled his car toward the curb, each motion deliberate. The evening had been unremarkable, but in an instant, it had transformed into something else entirely. The police cruiser pulled up behind Eric's car, engine growling as if eager for confrontation. The glare of the lights reflected off his rearview mirror, flooding his calm expression in harsh flashes of red and blue. Eric rolled down his window, his movements steady, his breath measured. The driver's door of the cruiser swung open, and out stepped Officer Bradley Larson. Mid-30s, buzz-cut, muscular frame, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming under the streetlight. His stride carried an air of exaggerated confidence, the kind born not of discipline but of unchecked authority. Every gesture announced ownership of the moment. "License and registration," Larson demanded, his voice clipped, flat, with the faint edge of someone who expected obedience without question. Eric nodded politely, retrieved the documents, and handed them over without hesitation. His hands moved with deliberate calm, careful to avoid sudden gestures. He had lived long enough to understand the unspoken rules of encounters like these. Larson glanced at the license, then back at Eric, his gaze narrowing. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Eric met his eyes evenly. "I'm not entirely sure, officer." "You didn't come to a complete stop at that light," Larson replied, though a flicker of uncertainty flashed in his expression. "I slowed in time," Eric said quietly. "But I understand. The exchange might have ended there. A warning. A ticket. A gesture toward procedure." But Larson lingered, his stare sharp, searching for more. His lips tightened as if the license in his hand wasn't enough. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, tone shifting, his words probing for something unsaid. Eric kept his voice steady. "I moved here a few months ago. The address is on the license." But the question wasn't about addresses, and they both knew it. Larson leaned closer to the open window, his shadow falling across Eric's calm face. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" "Home," Eric replied evenly. "Mind stepping out of the car for me?" Larson ordered, his tone tightening, authority dripping from every syllable. Eric's grip on the wheel tightened slightly. His pulse remained steady, but inside he recognized the moment for what it was. No longer a traffic stop, but a test of will. "Is there a reason, officer?" Larson smirked faintly, his hand brushing against his belt. "You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." The implication hung in the air like a blade. Eric exhaled slowly, then pushed the door open. He rose from the car with measured composure, his shoulders square, his movements controlled. He stood taller than Larson, his frame solid yet non-threatening, his suit neat even in the harsh light of flashing sirens. Larson's eyes swept over him, cataloging details, none of which matched the picture he wanted to see. The tailored suit, the polished shoes, the unshaken calm. But prejudice wasn't logical, and Larson's suspicion had already been written. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered. Eric complied, his palms open, his stance steady. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Larson smirked. "Just routine. We've had incidents around here. You can never be too careful." Eric tilted his head. "Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans? Or something else?" The words landed like a strike, and Larson's smirk faltered. For the first time, the balance shifted slightly. His hand flexed near his holster, more reflex than necessity. "Watch your tone," he snapped. Eric's reply was calm, razor-sharp. "I'm simply asking for clarity. Transparency matters in interactions like this, doesn't it?" Larson said nothing, but his jaw tightened. The evening was no longer routine. It was a collision course, and neither man seemed willing to step aside. "Turn around," Larson ordered coldly. "Hands on the hood." Eric hesitated only for a second before complying. He placed his palms flat against the warm metal of his car, the faint vibration of the engine steady beneath his skin. The silence between them pressed heavy, broken only by the crunch of Larson's boots on the asphalt. The officer's hands moved quickly, roughly, across Eric's frame. It wasn't just procedure, it was theater. Each pat, each shove, carried the weight of assertion, not about safety, but dominance. He lingered longer than necessary, searching not for weapons but for reasons. "You're clean," Larson muttered finally, irritation clear in his tone. The lack of discovery wasn't relief, it was disappointment. Eric turned, his eyes steady, his voice calm. "Of course I am." Larson bristled. "Don't get smart." "I'm not," Eric said evenly. "I'm just pointing out what you already know." The words, spoken without anger, unsettled Larson more than defiance ever could. His authority, designed to provoke fear, had met something he didn't understand: control. He paced in a tight circle, frustration simmering. Most people broke under his tone, fumbled with nervous words, avoided eye contact. Eric did none of those things. "You seem pretty confident," Larson muttered. "Like you think you know what's going to happen next." Eric's gaze didn't waver. "Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, a storm cloud gathering above the pavement. Larson's smirk faltered, replaced by something harder, something defensive. For the first time, the officer felt the faintest tremor of doubt. Larson's frustration bubbled, spilling into his words. "Fairness? You think that's what this is about? People like you always?" He stopped abruptly, the words choking in his throat, but the damage was done. The phrase hung in the air, unfinished yet complete. Eric straightened, his eyes locking with the officer's. His voice dropped, quiet but sharp. "People like me?" The question was soft, but it struck with the weight of accusation. Larson stepped back, defensive now, his earlier swagger faltering. "You know what I mean," he muttered, though his tone lacked conviction. "I think I do," Eric replied. His calmness wasn't passive anymore. It was precise, like a blade slicing through pretense. The silence stretched, heavy with what had been spoken and what had been revealed. Larson shifted uncomfortably, the power he wielded slipping through his grasp. He opened his mouth to recover, but nothing came. Eric let the pause linger before speaking again. This stopped being about a traffic violation a long time ago. The words were undeniable. They cut through every excuse, every justification, leaving only truth. Larson's eyes darted, his confidence cracked. He was losing control, and for the first time, he knew it. Eric leaned slightly closer, his voice steady, unflinching. "Officer, you have no idea who you're talking to." The cliffhanger hung between them, electric. Eric's hand moved slowly toward his pocket, each motion deliberate, his eyes locked on Larson's twitching hand near the holster. "I'm reaching for my badge," Eric said firmly. "No need for theatrics. Just watch." Larson froze, his chest tightening, his mind scrambling. Eric pulled out a leather wallet, flipped it open, and revealed a gleaming badge. The gold caught the siren's light, casting reflections that seemed to cut through the night itself. "Eric Porter," he said, voice calm, almost casual. "Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division." Larson's world stopped. His breath hitched. His eyes darted from the badge to Eric's face, searching for deception, but finding none. The officer's bravado evaporated in an instant. His authority, once weaponized, now felt like a chain around his neck. "Internal Affairs," Larson whispered, his voice breaking. "Yes," Eric replied, his tone sharp yet calm. "And you've given me a very personal demonstration of exactly why my job exists." Larson's shoulders sagged, his eyes flicking to the ground. The man who had strutted toward the car minutes ago now looked small, diminished. Eric stepped closer, his words slicing through the silence. "Do you understand the weight of what you've done tonight? The profiling, the baseless escalation, the disrespect. All of it without knowing who you were talking to." Larson swallowed hard, his throat dry. "This isn't about me," Eric continued. "It's about every person who doesn't wear a suit, who doesn't carry a badge, who doesn't have the power to fight back." The officer's lips parted, but no defense came. The reveal had stripped him bare, leaving only shame. Eric didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His authority carried more weight than any shout could. "The badge doesn't make you better than anyone," Eric said steadily. "It makes you accountable to everyone." Larson flinched at the words, his face pale, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "You've worn that uniform like a weapon," Eric continued, "but tonight, you'll learn it's a responsibility. And when that responsibility is abused, it destroys trust not just in you, but in every officer who wears the same colors." The officer's silence screamed louder than words. His earlier arrogance had collapsed into fragile fear. "You'll hear from me again," Eric warned. "Not as a driver you stopped on the side of the road, but as the man who decides whether you're fit to wear that badge." The sentence was a verdict. Final. Larson nodded stiffly, his hands trembling as he returned the license and registration. The simple act felt like surrender. Eric tucked them away, his movements calm, precise. Then he leaned closer, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Remember this moment, because it will define you more than any arrest, any citation, any case you've ever touched." With that, he stepped back into his sedan, leaving Larson rooted in place, a man unraveling under the weight of his own choices. The engine purred as Eric pulled back into traffic, the siren lights fading in his rearview mirror. The night, once ordinary, now carried a weight that pressed against his chest. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel vengeful. What lingered was something heavier, the knowledge that what he'd endured wasn't unique. Larson was just one man, one symptom of a deeper sickness. Eric drove in silence, the radio now off, his thoughts louder than any melody. For years he had worked to hold officers accountable, to demand higher standards. Tonight had reminded him exactly why that work mattered. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Eric's office blinds. On his desk sat a file marked, "Officer Bradley Larson." Eric opened it. The record wasn't spotless. Complaints of unprofessional conduct, excessive stops, vague misunderstandings, never properly addressed. Chief Daniels entered, his face drawn. Eric recounted the stop, every detail. "This isn't the first time Larson's name has come up," the chief admitted. "And that's the problem," Eric replied. "Quiet discipline fixes nothing. Quiet lets it keep happening." Daniels leaned back, sighing. "What do you propose?" "A department-wide review," Eric said firmly. "Not just officers. Training, protocols, accountability systems. All of it." The chief studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You're going to ruffle feathers." "Good," Eric answered. "It's about time." Weeks later, Eric stood at a podium facing officers, city officials, and residents. "Justice isn't just about catching the guilty," he declared, his voice steady, resonant. "It's about ensuring the people sworn to protect do so with integrity, fairness, and respect. Without that, the badge is meaningless." The room erupted in applause. Some skeptical, some hopeful, but all listening. Larson, meanwhile, faced suspension, his career teetering on the edge. But Eric knew the true victory wasn't in punishing him, it was in preventing the next Larson. "This is our duty," Eric continued. "Not to wield authority, but to honor it. Not to demand respect, but to earn it." As the hall filled with applause once more, Eric stepped down from the podium, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. He knew change wouldn't come overnight. But tonight, a conversation had begun, one that could ripple far beyond Sacramento. And for Eric Porter, that was enough.